Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Brayton Alley, and I am Director of Client Development for Northern Trust's wealth management business here in the Midwest. And on behalf of all of my partners at Northern Trust, we'd like to thank you for joining us at Expo Chicago and what will surely be another interesting conversation on women artists and the market. I do feel compelled to acknowledge that I was neither the intended choice of introducers this afternoon, nor the first or second replacement post for this enviable task. But needless to say, conflicts do arise, and so here I am, and you're stuck with the white male. Anyway, we are pleased to have this august group together on this panel. Joining us are Elizabeth Fiore, who is an art advisor and founding member of the Association of Professional Art Advisors, the APAA. Is that?
No, I'm not a founding member.
But you are a member.
Yes.
Okay. We'll have to bring that back to corporate to correct that.
Please
Sorry.
do.
Monica Brown, Senior Specialist of Prints and Multiples at Hindman Auctions. Susanne Vielmetter, who is the owner of Susanne Vielmetter Gallery in Los Angeles. And Jessica Silverman, owner of Jessica Silverman Gallery in San Francisco. Today's program is being video recorded for archival and possible future promotional purposes. Just note that any audience questions or interactions will not be included in any future promotional materials, FYI. So please join me in welcoming Victoria Burns, art advisor and executive board member of the APAA, who will facilitate this discussion. And Victoria, you can take it away. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So good to see you all. I wanted to say that I'm being asked by Tony Carmen to prepare a panel for Expo Chicago. I was pretty excited to do a panel on women artists and the market. Sorry, I'm a tiny bit nervous, but I will calm in a moment. And but it was a really interesting idea to look back on my 30-year career of being an art advisor and assessing all the artwork I have placed in 30 years and realizing that I had only placed 25% women artists. And none of this was intentional. So now it made me think that awareness is part of this discussion, that so many of us are loving contemporary art, and we love work made by men and women, but sometimes we may not be aware of how we're promoting women artists. And so I wanted to invite some of my colleagues along with me to have a discussion about women artists and the market. And, excuse me, I have my notes in the wrong order. First, we're going to look at some auction records with Monica Brown of Hindman Auctioneers, because we want to actually talk about the last 10 years in the marketplace. And I also want to talk with Susanne Vielmetter, who's a 30-year veteran in the art business, and Jessica, who's having her 10th anniversary this year. And Elizabeth Fiore and I are both Association of Professional Art Advisors members. And we have to think through how it is that we look at art and whom we share with our clients. I want this discussion to be positive and illuminating. There is really not a gender discussion, and it's not a whining of any kind, but there really are some interesting facts that we want to share just to start looking at the marketplace. And just in general, these are just some terribly interesting facts. The Art Basel report on the art market comes out every year, and this is actually some material from 2019, although much of this information actually has stayed very constant until about the third slide. You'll see things have changed slightly. But 11% of all acquisitions at 26 prominent art museums over the past decade were work by women artists. And this is interesting because the proportion of women to men in art schools is quite the opposite. There are many more women in art schools than men. And so it's interesting that in the marketplace, women seem to be behind men. 14% of all exhibitions at 26 prominent U.S. museums over the past decade were work by women artists. Out of 3,050 galleries on the Artsy database, 48% represent 25 or fewer women artists, 10% represent no women at all, and only 8% represent more women than men. Now, this new research material is from this year, so 2022 report that came out about a week ago. Male artists make up about 60% of high net worth individual collections, yet there are indications that this imbalance may be slowly improving. At 40%, the share of female artists' work has increased from 39% in 2020, 37% in 2019, and 33% in 2018. In 2021, works by female artists constituted approximately 7% of the works offered for sale at global auction houses. So this begins actually a discussion that we wanted to bring art history into. And I thought a good springboard place was the Women of Abstract Expressionism. There's a fabulous book that came out about 4 years ago called The 9th Street Women, about the 5 women who were alongside the Abex painters like Franz Klein, Willem de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, the women who are also very much part of this movement. Mary Gabriel just wrote this incredible book, which I encourage everyone to read, and keep your iPad alongside so you can look up every single painting she discusses. But in the last 10 years, their auction markets are illustrative of what's happened to women in the market. So I'd like to ask Monica Brown to actually take us through those slides and talk a little bit about 3 of the 5 women, and then we'll move on to contemporary art after that.
Sure. So this, basically what I wanted to do is take the last 10 years. That's when we've really seen a lot of growth in the market for these particular artists. From the ArtNet database, I took all of the artists and combined their total sales over the past 10 years. So these are the total sales for all 5 women. It went from 23 million to 100 million in overall sales in 10 years. So that's what we're looking at, is a 300% growth in that market just since 2011.
Monica, can you hold your microphone up closer?
Yeah. So what I think is most interesting about that is that when you look at the male artist, their male counterparts, when you're looking at the Jackson Pollocks, the Motherwells, and they experienced that growth probably in the 1970s and 80s, and many of them saw that growth in their lifetime, and they were able to experience that success, that financial success in their lifetime. Next slide. So what I did then is I broke down the 3 artists. This is Helen Frankenthaler. You can see her average value went from $278,000 to $1.5 million in the past 10 years. That's an average of all of the paintings sold per year. Next slide. And this is Royal Fireworks that sold in just 2019, and that work was purchased in 2011 for $800,000 and then sold for $7.8 million in 2020. So that's a lot of growth in 10 years. Next slide. Lee Krasner, very, very similar situation. In 2011, average value of $480,000 going up to $6 million. And her highest painting is $11.6 million. Next slide. And this is The Eye is the First Circle. Really incredible work by Lee Krasner. Next. And then also Joan Mitchell. Her average value has doubled in the past 10 years. And the highest price for her painting at auction was $16 million. And last year she sold a $20 million painting at Art Basel. So, and that is her record painting.
So what I'd like to do is get into contemporary art and have the perspective of 2 art dealers, Susanne Vielmetter and Jessica Silverman, and have them each talk a little bit about some of the artists in their roster, also about an artist that they share, Andrea Bowers, which we'll get to, and then we'll return to talking a little bit about the hot contemporary auction market for young artists as well. Susanne?
Hi, thank you all for coming. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me on this panel, Victoria. As you might know, I've been doing this for 22 years. and I am still involved with quite a lot of the artists that I started the gallery with. And I've been working with Nicole Eisenman for a very long time. This is a relatively recent paintings, two major works that one of which went into a major museum collection recently. What I would like to address with this particular artist is the difficulty to the increasingly more difficult trajectory that artists and galleries embark on when they work together. Very often young galleries represent very young artists, and then in an ideal case, as the artist career grows, the gallery also grows with them. And in the recent couple of years, the biggest problem for us mid-level galleries is that very often the very large, very often male-run galleries swoop in and pick up the artists after we have done a lot of the kind of building of the career work, which is very often financially not as rewarding as harvesting the fruit, so to speak. And so here is an artist who, when faced with this dilemma, actually made the decision to go accept an offer of one of the largest 5 galleries, but at the same time to also stay with the galleries who built the career, of which I'm one of them. So I strongly feel that we're entering a kind of new era that I feel is more collaborative than the era that when I started the gallery, where the artists also have more market savvy and exert more agency. And very often, interestingly enough, the artists who really are on the forefront of that are female artists, or sometimes now also black artists, who want to understand the business more and are interested in what their role is or what agency they have to make change. Here's another artist, Genevieve Guignard, a young artist that we just started working with. She makes the point in this work, she deliberately asked the gallery to actively reach out to black collectors and to diversify our client base. And that's another interesting point. My gallery has, from the very beginning, very much focused on building a diverse program, and part of that is to give female artists equal weight in the gallery than male artists. And you can only financially pull this off if at the same time you build a diverse collector base. Because if your collector base is 100% white male, you will not be able to succeed. So now we are at a point where artists actually beginning to understand that and push for that as well. It's still not easy to do, but at least there is an awareness of that now. So
I have a question for you too, Susanne, and then you can get back to talking about Deborah Roberts' work, but you are oftentimes, or I think you were quoted in a newspaper article once talking about quality, that the quality of a woman artist might be different than the quality of a male artist, which infuriates me to hear. That I just think great art is great art no matter who makes it. And so I'd love to ask you about that
Yeah, fortunately, that argument is now not so much being made anymore because it's dawning on people that the mere question is very problematic. But it used to be when I can really say the first 10 years when I run the gallery, these issues of diversity and having 50% of my represented artists being female artists was always important to me, but it was very difficult to talk about that. If I was trying to explain, mostly to male collectors, that I was doing that and why I was doing that, they would get very upset. The question inadvertently would come up, well, but shouldn't you simply represent the best artists? It's that simple. Why are you having these strange perception of numbers or female versus male? Does it even make a difference? And of course, this has everything to do with the market. The idea of being desirable or performing well in the market is not something that lies within the object that we want. It has to do with conventions that we come up with. We all have an agreement, very often unspoken, about what it is that we assign value to. And that is directly related to who is participating in this market. If you only have white men determining what at a certain moment in time is valuable, then most likely only white male artists are considered to being valuable.
But we do have many more women collecting and initiating collections and building collections of all female artists. So that we'll get to that as well. But I also wanted to talk about the revival or the promotion of artists who've been working for a very long time that may never have been recognized. And I think this is something about Deborah Roberts, perhaps.
Deborah Roberts is, fame came to her relatively late in her career. She also went to art school relatively late. What is amazing about this is that she is mature. She can handle the enormous stress of when all of a sudden the entire art world pays attention to you and you have to make smart business and career decisions for yourself, which often involve that you don't want to dance at every wedding and that you don't have to say yes to every invitation. She has the emotional maturity to make very good decisions in that regard.
That's exciting. And you have a show that just opened in the gallery.
Yes,
Arlene?
This is a work by Arlene Shackett. Arlene is an artist who has made art all her life. She went through one of the traditional dilemmas that a lot of us go through. She got married and had children and raised them. And so once they were out of the house, she really doubled down on her work. She is, in my book, more driven and ambitious than any 21-year-old artist I've ever met. And the work is mature. She knows what she is worth. She knows what she wants. And again, somebody who makes very good career decisions for themselves.
And the patinas on those ceramics are extraordinary.
Impeccable.
This is an artist that the two of you share, so I'd love it for Jessica to get involved, and then we'll start talking a little bit about her program. But what's it like for you all to share an artist? And also, I want to point out that one of the inspirations for this talk were these two fabulous exhibitions in Chicago that you all just had, which was Andrea Browers at the MCA and Barbara Kruger at the Art Institute. So I hope some of you in the room saw those two shows because they were epic and fabulous, and so it was long overdue, I think, for Andrea. But I'd love for you guys to talk about her.
Great. Yeah, well, I've been working with Andrea for a long, long time. I love her. We built a career from the very beginning. Andrea is now an internationally recognized artist. She's the artist who stands for activism, or feminist activism, perhaps, to be exact. And this is a very good example. Thank you for bringing it up. When I said earlier, and I talked about Nicole Eisenman, who made the decision that when one of the big 5 galleries knocked on the door, she recognized this was her moment of negotiating power. She told them, I'm going to stick with my other galleries. In this case, Jessica Silverman, who I think is one of the most promising and hardworking young dealers,
I don't know if I'm so young anymore.
and wanted to do a show with Andrea. I strongly believe that every gallery, mid-career gallery, younger gallery, more powerful global gallery, can bring something to an artist's career that is valuable for them. And so I think it behooves us all to collaborate and keep the artist at the center of the of the constellation and give them something that can benefit them. And by doing that, it benefits all of us.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in and say Andrea now has a few galleries other than us, and Susanne was immediately very supportive, and we had, things to work out, but it's been a great working relationship, and I hugely admire Susanne's program, so it's a pleasure to share Andrea's work together, and it is true, we have to always be thinking about the artists first, and so I think that's what we work towards doing, and we have a show with Andrea up now at the gallery, in fact, and this was from Susanne's last show. Right.
This is actually much earlier work. We showed it at Art Basel. This is a more recent work, but yeah, I'm happy to hand it over to Jessica now.
And actually going from Andrea, if I may, is kind of a nice segue. I think we're going to speak about Judy Chicago because Judy really sees Andrea as like a protege and actually sent flowers to the gallery for Andrea that said, oh, I see that we're so aligned in our thinking. I love your show. Congratulations. So, yeah.
Well, since we're having a talk about women artists in the market, largely we wanted to not focus too much on gender. Again, we wanted to focus on great work by great artists that sometimes happen to be women. But in some instances, there are women like Andrea and Judy Chicago whose work has a very strong feminist bent. And so most people know Judy Chicago from her very early work from the 70s, The Dinner Party. And I, too, am a little bit guilty of this because until I saw an exhibition 3 years ago of her massive scale outdoor sculpture that was pale pink but minimalist is very much equal to the minimalist sculptors of the 70s. I just wasn't aware of it. Yeah. And so it's interesting about talking about how you guys are, especially you, Jessica, taking on an older artist and giving her career new life. And I'd love for you to talk about that.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me with my esteemed colleagues. Having the opportunity to represent Judy Chicago is tremendously exciting. I was very excited early on to work with her, and we're actually now her primary dealer. So one could say that Judy needs no introduction, except most of the work people know is either The Dinner Party or the 1960s work. I think you're speaking about the show that she did with Jeffrey Deitch. So when we first did a show with Judy, I guess it was in 2017, we titled the exhibition Pussies. And Judy loved it because actually she's truly a cat person. And she made these incredible drawings of her cats throughout the day. So the cat's eating breakfast, the cat's going to sleep. And so I wanted to, and with an artist of her generation, she's 83, I wanted to really engage with her earlier work, but it was also very important to her that I engage with her recent work because she is an artist who has continued to make, even without any market recognition for many, many years. So we did this exhibition, which was a through line from her dinner party plates, which reference women's bodies, to these cat paintings.
Do we have any of those in here?
I don't think we have any cat paintings. It's okay. You can look online. And over the course of the past few years of working with Judy, I've really tried to focus on placing her work in major collections. Obviously, institutions have been a priority. The MCA Chicago acquired a work a few years ago, which was major because her real name is Judy Cohen. She then was married a few times, husbands died, and she gave herself the name Judy Chicago because she had such a strong Chicago accent. And just a great anecdote about this body of work, the sprayed acrylic lacquer on acrylic sheets. We actually have the small 3-star Kunst paintings in our booth.
Is that like the one we had before? Hold on.
That's the early one. Yeah, this is actually in our booth. So Judy was the only woman in a class of 250 men that learned how to do auto body paint. And so this is a technique that actually comes from these classes in LA of auto body painting, the sprayed lacquer on acrylic. We also passed over one of her birth project works. No worries. So here, Judy is an artist who does not shy away from any content, birth being one of it. If you're thinking about women in the world and power, this idea that women have this power to give birth is really important to her. And something that's really fascinating also about this body of work is while it is Judy Chicago's work, the full credit line actually acknowledges all the women who worked with her, and she had hundreds, like she did for the dinner party. So there's a really kind of collaborative spirit in her practice. Actually doing all the needlepoint and sewing. And she just had a huge retrospective at the DeYoung Museum and is actually being honored tonight at the National Museum for Women in the Arts. So, woo-hoo, go Judy. She's not stopping at all. And Claire Rojas. So Claire is a newer artist to our program, an artist who I've admired for a tremendously long time. Claire is from Ohio, moved west, actually made music, got married to Barry McGee, has painted and made work her whole career, but has suffered actually from her partner having a bigger career than hers. In her 40s, daughter has gone off to college. Claire got her own studio, created her own space. It's about 5 years ago, and she is totally on fire, focused. And, like Susanne talked about, this kind of like, there's no BS for her. It's just sort of like, she's going to make the right decision. She's going to stay focused in the studio. She knows what she wants. She wanted a New York show, so we've aligned her with Andrew Krebs. So she'll be having a show with Andrew Krebs next year, which we're very excited about. This painting actually was just acquired by the Hammer Museum, which is thrilling. So we're really working closely with Claire and hard to ensure that her market is where she deserves to be. When you look at, and Judy talks about this all the time, she jokes about Larry Bell because they're the same age. They were born in the same hospital, but she makes like a penny to his $100 or something. We have to be conscientious to not raise prices too fast because we're also building a market and we want good collectors and institutions to acquire the work. But I think that Claire has just an incredible ride ahead of her and a group show coming up at the Contemporary in Austin, amongst many other things. So Rose B. Simpson, and I should mention Claire and Rose are also on the stand. So Rose is a Native American artist living on the Santa Clara Pueblo, where she was born and raised, right outside of Santa Fe. Fascinating family history on her mother's side, 6 generations back. She comes from an object maker and artist family. So her mother is Roxanne Swensel, who's also a quite famous Native American ceramicist. And we started working with Rose. I saw her work in, New Year's 2018. Walked into a museum. Being a dealer, you usually know what you're looking for. You kind of have an agenda. But I walked into this museum. I had never heard of Rose's work. And I thought, well, either it's like the high altitude or I'm tired. But I don't know. This work seems really good. So we drove into town, met with her then dealer in Santa Fe and have been working with her ever since. If we go back one slide, the work on the right is now owned by the Guggenheim, which is exciting. And then the work in the next slide, this was a commission for the Nevada Art Museum, and they acquired the whole commission. So really exciting. And Rose has a big show coming up at ICA Boston, amongst many other things. So really proud of her.
Fabulous. So I confessed to you all earlier that in my long career, I went, to prepare for this talk, I looked through all my records to see how many women artists I had placed, and it was really shocking. So I am going to ask my colleague, Elizabeth Fiore, because I kind of asked her to do the same thing. I don't know if she went fully through it, but of course it's shocking, and now we're like really hyper aware of making sure that we're looking at all the fabulous women artists on the market. But I'd like to ask you about some of the artists that you were there early, and just talk a little bit about how you focus your collectors.
So I started my career in 1990 at Pace Gallery, where Agnes Martin was one of the only artists we represented. I then went to Anina Noze Gallery, and so in 1992 I met this artist, Gata Amer. I was in Paris and I was taken to her studio, and I consider myself a champion of women artists, not only selling them, but an advocate for them. And Gata, I took Gata under my wing, and I saw this piece and I was just so taken by it. And I kept saying, but who's the fifth woman working? There are 4 panels of women doing domestic chores, and the fifth was Gata Amer herself making the painting. And I was so struck by that. And I just remember feeling in awe of her. So we did her first one-person show in New York in 1996 at Anina's, and I'd been an advocate for the work ever since. And we'll just go through, this is another example of one of her other works. I'm sure you all have seen the work before. Also, while at Anina's, we did the first show of Shireen Nishat, and we showed the Women of Allah series. And it was a great opportunity for me to go from Pace to Anina's because I had more creative liberties, and it was really interesting to also work with an Iranian artist and an Egyptian artist. And Anina was at the time that I was with Anina, we were known for showing artists from other countries and got away from the all-male artists from the 80s. So that was a really good opportunity for me. We also showed Adriana Varejão for the first time in New York. In 1995, there was a Brazil-New York exchange, and we were able to choose who we wanted to show, and we chose Adriana. We actually placed this piece in an important Mexican collection. Jumping now to Janaína Chape. She's a Brazilian-German artist that is represented by Sean Kelly. She's someone I've known since 1996. This piece is actually in my personal collection. And I was going to open a gallery, and I was going to represent Janaína, and then I decided that I enjoyed art advising more than actually having the gallery and representing a limited number of artists. I had more freedom to to work with a lot of artists and to also be involved. So I've been involved with Janaína's career over the years as well.
Although I want to interject to say that was easier 20, 30 years ago. The art world was smaller, and the ability for an art advisor to maybe know almost all the major artists on the market was really possible. Whereas today, the art world has expanded so exponentially that in some ways I'm a tiny bit jealous of you guys because you have your 20 or 30 or 50 artists. We are literally, you and I are sorting through the work of thousands and thousands and thousands of artists from around the world to disseminate which are the ones that we want to share with our clients. It's really pretty
And we work hard at trying to keep on top of all of them, but it's Tough chore.
Yeah, but fun. It's also a fun
This
chore.
is a painting that I placed in a collection in Los Angeles with one of my clients who doesn't, he doesn't look at art male, female, he just looks at the art.
We hope everyone's doing that. That's the way it should be. Okay, keep going.
So this is an interesting encounter I had with Valeria Napoleone. She was a huge inspiration to me. She has a collection of all women artists. And she bought Gada Amer and Shireen Nishat from us, and we became very friendly. And again, she was just an inspiration to me. I would go to her house in London and surrounded by all of these women artists. So I took that along my career with me. This is an example of Henny Alftan is a great artist that's represented by Karma Gallery, and I became obsessed with her. Karma did a show of her work a couple of years ago when you could buy the work. And I fell in love with it. I placed a lot of work with a lot of my collectors. And actually, Sinisa from Karma Gallery said I was the advisor that placed the most work of her in my collection, my collectors. So she's another one. So another obsession of mine right now is Sarah Miska. Sarah had a show with Night Gallery. She's about to have a show with Friends Indeed in San Francisco. And I am just in love with the work. And I've also placed a lot of work with my collectors. This is an example of a collection that I'm working on with someone that I've been working with since 1996. I did my first independent show in a loft that I was living in New York City. And she walked in dressed in Chanel, and she bought a painting by Elsie Armstrong, which was a pattern of Chanel fabric, which was really interesting. But this is a work, sorry, just go back one. So this is Henny Alftan, and this came out of the last show at Karma Gallery. And with Sandra, we're collecting mainly female artists, although we just bought a Christopher Myers from James Cohen, which was a piece about a woman, though. So that was really interesting. But we don't want to discriminate, but we are interested in mostly female artists. This is Richard Avedon and Ivy Haldeman. This is in her living room. Ruth Merck. Again, it's work that's very difficult to get, but we were able to buy this painting from Downs and Ross. And I think that might be it. And now to Victoria.
I might go quickly because I kind of want to get us into a little bit more of a discussion. But I, too, was there kind of early with Shireen Nishat. I placed a couple of works in the late 90s, early 2000s. Actually, one of the pieces in your slide I also placed recently, but was really fascinated with her work and the work of Shazia Sikandar as well. This was placed at the MacArthur Foundation in 1996, I believe, and her career has become quite substantial ever since. Alicia Quade, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly, but is an artist that we were lucky enough to see before the kind of career explosion. Pei White is an artist that is an LA artist that many of us know and love, and is in Jessica's booth right now. The Smoke Tapestry is actually made from a digital photograph of smoke. It's made from a photograph of smoke and translated to a digital loom, and it's quite an enormous and spectacular piece. Alex Prager and her film work from Face in the Crowd. This is Ebony Patterson. There's a spectacular Ebony Patterson right now in Monique Meloche's booth. While you're walking around, you'll see this beaded peacock, and the feathers run up the wall with all these collage elements. This is one of her incredibly epic scale pieces. That's a detail, so you can see up close what's going on. Deborah Roberts from Susanne Vielmetter's show. And quite an extraordinary piece. What you can't see is her ass cheeks are hanging out of her dress. And it says, "That's not ladylike." Gada Amer, I just wanted to bring her back into the conversation. This is her most recent body of work, and we just placed this work. This is an earlier work by Genevieve Gagnard, who is a Susanne Vielmetter artist that I love. That piece is called Selfie Stick. And when I saw it, thinking about how people use their cell phones and, her traveling around to find all these vintage mirrors, she's now making these works on a much larger, more epic scale, but we were one of the first people to acquire that. And then Strange Fruit is from Suzanne's current exhibition. That was just placed. An incredible piece with a great backstory that I just don't have time to tell right now. Andrea Bowers, who I have loved for a very long time. And this piece, I think, is just so poignant because of what it says, what it represents, and is actually, she makes one after every mass killing. So it's raising money for an organization called Code Pink. And so I just absolutely love that she's trying to do something and keep the idea alive that arms are for hugging. Farelli Baez, whose career has also just exploded. We were super early finding this artist's work, and I think even in a small-scale object is incredible. And Katie Ryan, kind of like Elizabeth, sometimes the two of us find people that we love, and we are able to place one, but then we can never place it again because their career takes off so quickly that the work sometimes climbs in price, or there's so few pieces, they make 10 pieces a year, and 300 people want them. So suddenly the museums, trump our clients, or our clients trump each other's clients. It's really gotten very complex. So this brings me to actually kind of the more interesting part of the conversation that I'd like to address, which is there has been a meteoric rise for certain young artists. When I think of Julie Curtis, Loie Hollowell, Flora Yuknovich, Hilary Petchus, some of these artists are selling at auction for $500,000, and some even over $1 million. And I thought it was so interesting to go back to the 9th Street women, because we told you about the 3 9th Street women whose careers and auction records have grown exponentially in the last 10 years. But the 2 that we didn't discuss, Elaine de Kooning and Grace Hardigan, their auction results have been in the $200,000 range. So these are vintage artists from the 50s, very important art historically, but at auction standards haven't been able to reach these new heights. Whereas artists who are in their 30s, people are competing over fiercely around the world to get one of their very rare paintings. So I was curious to talk to the entire group here and jump in with your microphone, but is this a problem for young artists? If something like this happens to them, are they in danger of having career burnout? I would just really love to know what you all think about that.
I think this is a question really for the gallerists, but I think I wanted to bring up what Susanne was talking about before, about the fact that the people placing the value, who's putting value out there. So when you see prices at auction, what you're seeing is a reflection of what the value that society is placing on, or art collectors. It's not society as a whole.
Or a couple of individuals.
People who are, the few individuals that are bidding. And so I think Suzanne's point is something that I wanted to take out and highlight, that is part of society's. But the question that you're asking, I think, is for the gallerists, and how does it affect them?
Well, I think...
And their prices on the primary market, because you can't just have one piece go at 500 and it was 40 in your gallery a minute ago. How do you deal with that?
Exactly.
Well, I think there are several aspects here. Some are positive, some are not so positive. The positive aspect that I see is with the proliferation of social media, the art market has undergone the most profound change I have ever seen in all these years, and that is that so many more voices make themselves known. There's Instagram. There's, a lot of collectors are actually now looking on Instagram, and they're all weighing in. And what that means is that very simple pattern that we were used to in the early on, where we easily could say, oh, this is good, this is not good, because we had about 10 voices telling us what was good. That has changed the game forever. And it has made it better, I believe, because the chorus of opinions in the field is way more diverse now. That's the good part. The difficult part is that when these artist careers go off in the market, there's no real effective system to kind of put a stop on that other than self-restraint. Because very often these young artists, they have labored for many years. They have enormous art school debts. So when the market finds them, they're ready. They're ready to increase their prices, and they want to make money, and they should be making money.
And also they are making a lot of work.
Yes. And then the galleries that they're showing with are usually young galleries who also want to make money. So very often these two, and then there are the collectors who bought the work early on for 10 cents, and now it's, oh my God, $500,000. So there's three players in the field that are all working together, and they have the same goal to make more money. And that is when it gets dangerous. That's when an older gallery or that's where somebody who has been seeing these waves that build and that are absolutely not sustainable in the long run has to, perform restraint. You do not want to raise the prices just because you can. If you do that, you run a very high risk that these moments of fame and where things are going really well become shorter and shorter and less predictable and more unsustainable.
I think there are a lot of collectors who will not sell the work no matter how much the price goes up. I bought a Jonas Wood for $60,000 and now it's worth $2 million, and my client will never sell it. He wants to keep this painting. We have so many cases like that with Matthew Wong also. That's a market that skyrocketed.
But that's because you and I endeavored to get people to acquire things they love. And if they do it, that way, they don't tend to want to flip them.
Right.
I mean, I would also just say about the auction market, and you can speak a bit more about this. I mean, it's the only unregulated market, and I'm married to someone who wrote for The Economist about the art market, so she's kind of schooled me. But also when people are bidding, we often don't know how many people are bidding, and it could just be two. So the fact that the price has gone up to $500,000, it's hard to really tease out who is actually raising that price. And so to Susanne's point, when we then sit with an artist who that's happened to, we can't raise the prices to meet that demand.
Nor should you.
Nor should we.
However, that's when you have to take the how many people want them and then grade them, right?
Right. Well, then it becomes really, once that auction market has been turned on, you look at who you sold to and you think, well, are they going to sell? And then when you have new work, well, you encourage people to sell it back to you and sell it privately. And then when the artist has new work, you're really thinking deeply and intelligently about where you're placing it to ensure that it doesn't end up back on the auction block.
Well, I also would like to say something briefly from an artist perspective. Of course, when we're in the moment where things go well and things go up rapidly, that's wonderful. But it also puts, if that happens very early in an artist's career, I think it can easily skew a sense of how the career will develop in the long run, because you get used to that, the gallery gets used to that, and there's not a single artist that I know where things have gone up in a steep curve forever. It's just
because
not the
sometimes they
case.
change their body of work too. They become famous for a single body of work, and then they change, make something different, and then not everyone wants it, and that
Nothing
really
grows
devastate
ever
their
at
career.
200%. It simply doesn't. And so when it used to be that these increases or the way the arc of a career grew or flattened out or then grow again, those were very slow curves and they stretched out over 30 years, over an artist's lifetime. Now they go up and then they plateau and then they go down, then they go up again. And an artist can experience some of those upturns and downturns multiple times in their life. And so I feel like from a gallerist point of view, my responsibility is much more to work with the artists and to help them navigating these curves, which very often can take an emotional toll, in a way that suits them best. So if your market plateaus, or if all of a sudden it's a little bit saturated perhaps and there's not so much demand, that is the time that you can use for experimentation, and you will have at this point hopefully a little bit of a savings account that allows you to do that, and at the same time you don't have this pressure of expectation that you need to produce more of what made you successful in the first place, because if you produce that for the next 30 years, that'll most likely also be the end of your career. So you want to have room for experimentation and rest, and that is something that you can do when that moment wanes a little bit, so that you're ready, hopefully, for the next upturn in your market.
That's a great point. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.